Hello, everybody. Welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. As always, I'm your host, Beth Pilgreen, and we thank you for joining us. The concepts of corporate social responsibility and sustainability are nothing new. They've been a part of our working landscape since the mid-20th century. But in recent years, these initiatives have quickly gained momentum in response, in part to the acceleration of climate change and other crises across the globe. In short, what was once just a nice thing to do has become something that has a much greater potential for critical impact, and that shift is the focus of this episode. Today, we are joined by Susan McPherson. Susan is a corporate responsibility expert, and she is the founder and CEO of McPherson Strategies, a communications consultancy focusing on the intersection between brands and social impact. She is also a regular contributor to the Harvard Business Review, to Fast Company, and to Forbes. She also has over 25 years of experience in marketing, public relations, and sustainability communications. Susan, we are so glad to have you with us today.
I couldn't be more pleased. Thank you, Beth. I'm very excited.
All right, so let's briefly get everyone up to speed on what we're delving into today. As we said in the introduction, corporate social responsibility and sustainability have been a part of the corporate world to some degree since the 1950s. But I think there's still a lot of confusion surrounding the two concepts. Can you talk with us about what they are and where they intersect?
Well, it's interesting. There are numerous terms or terminology that's been used, whether it's corporate citizenship, shared value, sustainability. And to be honest, I don't judge by the terminology, but rather by the actions. I like the notion of sustainability because it's very ambition centered. You know, the future being around 100 years from now or 20 years from now. But I tend to, for lack of better terms, poo-poo the idea of shaming one term versus another. The most important is the actual ethos of what all of it stands for. And that is building a company that is not just thinking about its bottom line, but how it gives back and how it does not take away. And when I say give back, how does it support its community? How does it support its employees? How does it, give back to the global environment that we all have to share and live upon and live with? Again, in different times, we've seen one term jump ahead of another. But I think the most important thing right now is let's collectively agree that it must be not a nice to have, but a built-in necessary part of a company and a business, whether you are a startup or a multi-billion-dollar multinational corporation.
And this all evolved from the concepts of corporate philanthropy. Is that right?
Well, yes and no. We starting in the 60s and certainly in the early 70s with the advent of the Environmental Protection Agency, and I'm going to talk from a U.S. perspective because I am obviously more familiar with U.S. But I will say that if we look at our European brothers and sisters, they were well ahead of the game in terms of environmental sustainability. Less so on philanthropic because most of the governments, at least of Western Europe, are very much, the social safety net was often built in. In this country, when we look back at history, it was more from faith-based institutions and in certain times of history from our federal government. As the federal government on the social safety nets, as the government pulled back, we saw companies stepping up. But with regards to environmental sustainability, companies often would check that box so they would not be regulated. Okay. And obviously, as government regulations started to become more common in the 70s with Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, companies had to step up their game. Now, on the philanthropic side, you saw with the robber barons of the late 19th century, the Carnegies and the Rockefellers, their philanthropy was what we termed checkbook philanthropy, where there was a particular cause, whether one of these, at the time, uber wealthy people wanted to have their name on a hospital or, it was very much from somebody's ego, correct?
Yeah.
And that, continued up until modern times when you had a more community focus where you had this notion of getting your whole company behind a particular cause. And it's rather difficult to get your whole company rallying about being able to put your name on the side of a university, let's say, or a concert hall. And now, we see that checkbook philanthropy to be very much rooted into employee engagement, employee volunteerism, partnerships with NGOs that can actually activate positive happenings, positive change. So you do see the difference?
Absolutely. It's not just about the name at this point.
No.
Yeah.
Well, or the mission of one particular person
Sure.
sitting, an office that is at the top of the building. I mean, the whole world obviously is in the last, I feel like in the last 6 months has has changed. But if you look over the last 40 years, I mean, yes, there have been significant changes.
Sure. Well, CSR focuses on four main areas of interest. Can you share those with us?
Yes, a company must do more than seek strong profit margins for its success. Being socially responsible is part of survival in today's economy. It's going to allow you and to help you have employees that want to stay with you. It's going to bring you customers that perhaps wouldn't have come to you. And it's going to help your brand be one that people trust and admire and respect. So the four, I mean, if we break it down, the four types of corporate responsibility are a company's philanthropic efforts, environmental, conservation. Let's put back more than we take from our one and only planet Earth. It also has expanded to include company diversity, inclusion, and labor practices. And I can guarantee you, after the last 2 weeks, that is going to step up at an increasingly fast pace.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, given that this podcast is been rooted in the human resources area, you are well aware of that. And then obviously your community involvement. And I see that as how are you getting your employees involved in this greater mission, whether it be volunteering, whether it be funding, whether it be sharing on their platforms, because we know today everyone has their own means from which to share and to sadly shame, but also galvanize their friends and fans and families. So I see all of that as part of the world of corporate responsibility. And I do also just want to add one other thing.
Go ahead.
50 years ago and 100 years ago, we used to manufacture much of our apparel, certainly tools, computer, like much, much more than today. Most of the manufacturing that happens is offshore, meaning a company's footprint now extends to Southeast Asia. It extends to sub-Saharan Africa. It extends all over the world. So what happens outside the boundaries of the United States definitely affects here. So we have to think broader, and we have to think about the people working in our supply chain as part of our community, meaning we have a responsibility to support those people and make sure that they're adequately paid and that they're not harmed in the process of manufacturing the goods that we take advantage of day after day.
Mm-hmm. And I think that goes without question that is also fundamental and very important to the employees to know that as well. I think that people are having such more of a broader mind share of how they care for what their company is investing in and the people that they're investing in.
Absolutely.
So also talking about sustainability as well.
If we think of sustainability means, again, we don't have unlimited resources, okay? There's going to come a time when there's no more fossil fuels that we can pump out of the ground, okay? So that means we have to be resourceful and think of alternative energies that are going to power this earth. So if you are a company working in fossil fuels, to be sustainable means that you need to start thinking, wow, how else am I going to be able to power the world? And don't I need to invest in things like wind and solar and all sorts of other kinds of energy that we haven't even begun to imagine if you want to be around 20 years from now? Okay. How are you going to ensure you're hiring a workforce and training that workforce to have the jobs of the future? These are the things I think about when I think of sustainability. How am I going to prepare my workforce for the next pandemic? so that we don't have to go out of business. So, it's having a long-term vision and planning. Unfortunately, and I am not an economist, but when you look at how our financial systems have been set up, they are very much set up for the short term, which obviously is not in tandem with long-term vision and long-term sustainability. It's all about, what have you done for me lately? What sales have happened for you lately? And oftentimes that may be the not sustainable option. It may be more expedient and less costly for you to use the packaging you've always used, even though that packaging is, ripping apart, bamboo forests. I mean, again, I'm just tossing this out as ideas, but the thing is if you could spend money on research to find what is the best packaging that is not going to, like rip apart, an ecosystem in Indonesia, for instance, chop down trees, and also in the long run be less expensive because you would find a more sustainable means of which to package, right? Mm-hmm. But again, because if you're a publicly traded company, you need to meet these quarterly filings with the SEC, and you are driven by the stock of your company. So there's an inherent conflict. And my hope is that when companies think about sustainability, they do think of the long term. And yes, it may mean that their stock goes down, for a short bit of time, but on the upside, they are better prepared to handle these kind of future challenges that we know are going to come. I mean, there's something called climate change that is very much real. Mm-hmm. That 20 years ago, there was still a lack of consensus. If you recall, when the president pulled out of the Paris Treaty, about 800 CEOs of major companies signed a letter that was placed in the Wall Street Journal, and the letter said, "We are still in," because those companies sell to countries that did sign the treaty. So if they want to stay applying to companies in Germany or France or the UK or Spain, they have to abide by the rules.
Got it.
For your listeners who run companies, what kind of contingency plans can they put into place that helps them on the long term, that may seem in the beginning more costly now or more wasteful now? I can guarantee if you put these plans in place, you will be, 5-10 years from now, feeling and succeeding at a better level than had you not.
Sure. Well, I would assume too, and I hope that this is true, that everybody, especially with what's going on right now, would be more mindful about planning in that regard, because we don't know when something like this is going to happen again. Speaking of COVID-19, we have no idea. So it's wise to get a plan together now. How do companies benefit from being socially responsible?
Well, again, we're seeing study after study over the last 5 years show that millennials and Gen Z want to be working for companies that they know have a broader purpose. They want to be buying from companies that they feel are making the right choices. So for those two very reasons, it's really important for companies to get it right. Additionally, we know that companies that have diverse and inclusive senior management, middle management, actually have a better bottom line. Okay. And again, numerous studies show that. We know this country, 40% of this country is not white. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's a mixture of all different colors and sizes and shapes, et cetera. And so as a company, and that's only going to grow more in one direction. So a company that is going to be selling to that public should look like that public, right? Mm-hmm. And should be making every effort to hire so that you mirror the audience you are selling to. You will be far more successful. So, in answer to your question, it's going to come back in the bottom line. You also are going to, not that lists, matter, but, for many companies, it's important to be on the top of the Fortune best companies, on the top of the Forbes best companies to work for. Yep. You want to hire the best and brightest. And again, when students coming out of college, out of graduate school, see those lists, guess who pops up into the top of their, where they want to apply for jobs? Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, Susan, now that we're all on the same page, we're going to take a sponsorship break. When we return, we'll talk about the role of CSR and explore why this concept has experienced a huge surge of interest in recent years. So stay with us. Thanks for listening. Also, thanks to A Better Leader for supporting this week's episode of Project HR. A Better Leader is leadership training that brings your leaders into alignment. A Better Leader's online platform improves engagement and morale and directly affects your bottom line. Get your free 2-week trial at abetterleader.com. We're back with Susan McPherson, founder and CEO at McPherson Strategies. In January of this year, you wrote an article for Forbes titled Corporate Social Responsibility: What to Expect in 2020. This is the article that has inspired this discussion, and it documents this momentum shift within CSR that we mentioned at the top of the show. What exactly has been going on in the last 10 to 15 years that has paved the way for this shift?
If only I had had a magic ball or a magic, whatever they're called, crystal ball.
Crystal ball.
In January, it's like, oh, well, we're going to have a global pandemic this year. I probably would have won some sort of prize, but either that or I should have had to gone to Las Vegas and play the slot machines.
Yeah.
But the last 10 to 15 years, we saw the advent of social media. And with social media became the opening of the kimono. I like to, align it to, meaning transparency, meaning if a company did not share its, internal workings, those internal workings would come out. You also had a direct dialogue between the consumer and the company, which we never had before. If an individual wanted to complain about something, she or he would have to, send a letter, maybe to the website that may or may not get read, but it certainly wasn't in the public eye. You also had finally, and I think I made mention of this earlier, that climate change was here to stay, as sad as that may sound.
Mm-hmm.
So you had the realization that, we didn't have unlimited resources. And you also saw companies stepping up to write what is called annual sustainability reports. So all of a sudden, we came to a place now where 90% of the Fortune 1000 write some meaning or some annual report that showcases all of what they're doing from an environmental, philanthropic, and social perspective, meaning all that data is available for people. So guess what this all ends up happening? We have a more knowledgeable public. We have a more active consumer, a more intelligent consumer. And last but not least, we have companies that are stepping up for social impact causes and reasons, something that never happened before. Almost rarely did you see a company CEO or president step up on behalf of a political issue at the fear of risking, losing some customers. But those times are in the past.
Very much, yeah.
These all have contributed to massive changes in, if you want to go so far as call this an industry.
So let's pick apart this perfect storm. I'd assume the renewed interest and participation in activism, particularly among the younger segments of the population, has contributed to this shift. Is that right?
Well, absolutely, because they have grown up. I mean, these platforms, whether it be Twitter or Snapchat or, most recently TikTok.
TikTok, yeah.
These are the ways the individuals have grown up. I mean, remember, and I don't know your age, but I'm 55, and I grew up at a time where my news came to me Monday through Friday from 6 to 6:20 p.m. If we take out commercials, it was 3 white men telling me the state of the world. And 18 of those minutes were U.S. focused, and 2 minutes might have been on the Vietnam War or the Soviet Union, or something, it maybe 60 seconds, something in, sub-Saharan Africa. So it was a very monolithic, a very, male-dominated view. And then, fast forward from then to the aughts, where all of a sudden you had a 360-degree communications. You had the means to communicate between each other, between companies, between political leaders. It revolutionized how news and how people got their information to make judgments. So when you have a more informed public, you also have a public that's going to be asking more questions and demanding answers. So we know that, companies, they found that in order to be able to talk to this audience, they needed to step up and take stands on issues that previously were unbeknownst to them. Not just the public, their own employees. Their own employees have been pushing for their leadership to step up. And when you have it coming from within, you have to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly this current activism has occurred in great part due to the fact that there's a lot out there to be concerned about. Everything from political unrest throughout the world to income inequality to climate change and now to the pandemic. Well, while all of this is happening, the clock is also ticking on some key global initiatives like the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Accord. Is it fair to say that that's helped light a fire under these efforts as well?
I wish I could say they are. With the Paris Climate Accord, I mentioned earlier that the vast majority of major multinational companies are in. Whether the United States is in or not, from a political standpoint, is one thing. But these companies have to abide. Airline manufacturers, defense manufacturers, apparel manufacturers, anyone who does business outside the United States has to abide. So in many cases, we are still in, just not our federal government. And the U.S. Sustainable Development Goals provide a template that can help guide companies. But I will say the vast majority of small and mid-market businesses probably aren't as well aware of the UN Sustainability Goals because they are very much driven at companies that deal with global supply chains on a much larger footprint. In a perfect world, I wish more people, like more business, at the mid, because we know small business makes up a massive percentage of our GNP in this country, but I just don't think that they are as aware. But the companies such as, Kellogg and Microsoft and Intel, I mean, all of these companies are doing what they can to line their goals up so that by 2030, they can successfully see how they've done, which goals they've met, which goals they've fallen behind. It also gives a company a way to report back to its communities. And I say communities because I hate using the word stakeholders. People in corporate responsibility tend to refer to different interested parties called stakeholders. I don't think that's how human beings speak. I don't look at you as a stakeholder.
Yeah, I would never call myself a stakeholder.
But, we know, we have clients, our client Dell, has a robust roadmap to get to 2030. And much of it is based upon the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah. Well, you also noted in your article, there was the August 2019 statement from the Business Roundtable, which caused a lot of buzz. Would you explain to our listeners what was said in that statement and why it made such an impact?
It was, first of all, the Business Roundtable is made up of the CEOs of some of the largest companies in this country. And the latest statement was that the giving back to shareholders was no longer the primary concern of companies. That other than that, pay back to investors, which we know companies do through dividends and through stock buybacks, et cetera. Instead, it was on the climate, on the environment, on the communities from which it operates. And yes, of course, economic performance was still important, but it was no longer at the top of the food chain. It did cause a lot of buzz. It's a great stake in the sand, but let's see action. When you see CEOs still making, 200 times the salary of their lowest paid employees, that isn't doing the best by my book for the community. That is not doing the best to empower your junior employees.
No, not at all. I wouldn't be motivated by that fact.
No. And so to me, but again, I don't want to say, oh, shame on them for putting that out there because we need goals. We need them. But let's see 2 years from now or 2 years from August 2019, what action has happened from those CEOs and at those companies that those CEOs run.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I would be more motivated if those same people would make more environmental efforts and philanthropic efforts like what we've been discussing. Yeah.
Well, and even, pay your people better. There is
too.
Okay, I see you funding and writing checks here, but what about just paying your people?
Yeah.
a better wage. And, I mean, again, we all, everything is ruled, or it has been ruled by that quarterly, earnings projection. But I think this is where we're living in a time where we need radical thinking. We need people trying and taking chances.
Absolutely. Susan, yeah. Have we missed any other contributing factors?
Shortly after President Trump took office, we saw the bans on immigrants. And we saw CEOs stepping up for actually very pragmatic reasons. They hire immigrants. Big technology companies need a flurry of new talent coming into this country. And because that would affect the bottom line of those companies, companies like Google and Microsoft and Salesforce stood up and stated this needs to stop. And after the riots in Charlottesville, you saw the dismantling of the president's business councils, because many, many CEOs found the behavior to be abhorrent. You then have seen even issues such as gun violence, companies stepping up, putting out massive statements that we need stricter gun regulation in this country. This would have been unheard of, 20, 30 years ago.
Sure.
Now, I must state, companies do their research before taking these stands, and the public was already moving in that direction, so it was less risky. But even last summer, we saw 350 CEOs sign a declaration stating that the abortion bans that various southern states were passing were bad for business.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't come at it from a moral or, a human rights standpoint. It basically came down to, this is going to affect how we operate in those states. But when that CEO steps up, that CEO becomes, no fault or his or her own, but becomes a spokesperson for that issue, which can obviously be divisive, but it also can lead people to follow and to believe and to trust. And it in actuality, what it can do is bring it new customers, make its customers more, let's use the term sticky and part of that brand. And, we know Nike has done it well. And just this past week,
yeah.
Adidas retweeted Nike about.
I didn't see that.
Yes. I mean, this
wow.
is living in, times that, I wonder if that will happen with Coke and Pepsi, right? But
yeah.
But the point being is no one could have imagined companies to be doing this 20, 30 years ago. So I think we're on this new trajectory going forward, and no one can predict what it's going to look like 10 years from now. But I will say we're not going back. Companies are not going to be silent any longer.
Yeah. Well, Susan, it's time now for a very quick break. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Beth Pilgreen, and our guest today is Susan McPherson, founder and CEO at McPherson Strategies. We are back. So for those companies who perhaps have not yet fully embraced these concepts of CSR and sustainability, let's give them some inspiration. Who, in your opinion, is doing it right, and what companies are leading the way in CSR and sustainability?
Well, I would say that Paul Pullman, who's no longer the leader at Unilever, did quite a bit to get change established. He has often, while he was CEO of Unilever, pushed for looking at the long haul, looking at, putting long-term change in place, whether it was reduction in plastics, reduction in packaging sizes. And he became very much of a spokesperson, as well as companies he had acquired, that Unilever acquired, like Ben & Jerry's and Seventh Generation. And we know Ben & Jerry's was always built on this notion of human rights, civil rights. And just in this past week, they put out an ad, Ben & Jerry's, showing the 400 years of oppression that people of color have faced in this country. So even in its own branding, Ben & Jerry's, aka Unilever, is making this a core part of who they are.
Yeah, I've loved watching how they are stepping up in this regard.
Yes. Yeah. And there's no perfect company. Everybody has to go the route that is most comfortable for their organization. I mean, maybe not comfortable, but that makes sense for where they are right now.
Hmm.
And they may be in a different place 5 or 10 years. But I would say any B Corp, any company that has gone through the rigor of applying for benefit corporation status means they are pushing to be more than just about making money. I often just say, this is a moment of fluidity, and these companies have the power to really shake things up, not only at their board level, but let's get more women and more people of color on boards. Let's
Yeah.
get more women and more people of color in senior leadership positions. Let's do that with the same ferociousness as we are writing checks to charities, because we need systemic change. And it's a lot easier to be going about talking about the good things you're doing when you are doing good things.
Yeah, absolutely. For those companies who are still not on board, what do they risk by not engaging in CSR and sustainability efforts?
They'll be gone.
People won't work for them. How about that?
People won't work from them. People won't buy from them. Will that happen overnight? No. But if you believe in the long game in 20 years, if Exxon and Chevron and Shell don't start putting more investing dollars in developing renewables, they will eventually run out of fossil fuels. It may not be in our lifetimes, but if they want to be around when there's no more oil to extract from the earth, they're going to have to find other means, and
Yeah.
coal is not the future. So I and again, I wouldn't sit here and criticize them because I actually buy gasoline and I have a car. So I personally can only hold these companies as accountable as I hold myself, but I am I want to invest in companies that are investing in alternative energies. I want to invest in companies that are putting people of color in senior positions. I,
Hmm.
I know I'm not alone. So, these companies also have to think about it from, the investment side, which they depend on for massive influxes of cash, from pension funds, from mutual funds, from, big financial institutions. So that is a whole nother, that could be an entirely different podcast for you. But, that also, plays in as much in this new dynamic as the individual consumer. And, a Fidelity or, Bank of America, when they're investing in companies, has almost a much bigger footprint than, consumers going to the store and buying, their soup or their shampoo.
Let's talk about the good news here.
Yeah.
The good news is companies who do choose to start down this path don't have to do it alone, thanks to companies like yours, McPherson Strategies. Can you tell us a little bit about your company and how you can help those interested in developing a CSR strategy?
Sure, sure. I will caveat McPherson Strategies we are not sustainability advisors, meaning we're not going to come in and help you change your supply chain. We're not going to be able to direct you on how to shrink your packaging or use less water. There's very capable firms out there, everybody from the PwCs, Deloitte's, and Accentures to various, sustainability advisors. We, on the other hand, help you tell the stories. We help you message appropriately, authentically, the good you are doing to the audiences you want to reach, whether that means the employees of your company, whether that means to the investors of your company, or to the consuming public through traditional earned media. So we would be working in tandem with the people in marketing and the people in corporate responsibility at a corporation. And we also work with NGOs, nonprofits, which helps keep us, level and grounded.
Yeah.
We are 7 years old. We're in New York City and in Chicago. We have worked with Fortune 500. We've worked with major nonprofits. We've done a lot of work around environment, climate issues. And I'm blessed because I have an incredibly smart team, which they're much smarter than I will ever be, but they help keep me honest, and they're a joy to work with.
How can our listeners learn more about McPherson Strategies?
Well, what a lovely question. Certainly, you can come to our website where we have lots of case studies, and it's www.mcpstrategies.com. And people can follow me. I'm very active on Twitter at Susan McP1, as well as Instagram, Susan McP1. And I encourage anyone to connect with me on LinkedIn or any of the platforms. And I'm happy to answer questions as often as I can.
Well, links to McPherson Strategy's website, as well as to the article that inspired this episode, along with contact information, will be included in this episode's companion guide as well. So be sure to sign up for it today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Susan, it's time for our lightning round questions. And these are the questions we ask every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
You got it.
All right. Topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about corporate social responsibility and sustainability. In your opinion, which of these precocious climate change activists is more adorable? Greta Thunberg or Al Gore?
Oh, it has to be Greta Thunberg. Nothing against Al Gore. I'm a big fan, but Greta stole my heart the first time I came across her. And I've had the fortunate opportunity to see her speak in person many times.
Wow, that's awesome. What's the best book you've read recently?
Through this pandemic, I can't tell you how many books I plan to read, but I have been so unbelievably busy and spending more time reading news and reading things like The Atlantic and My New Yorker and the New York Times. And so shamefully, I can't say I've read anything really amazing of late. I have recently purchased several books to help me better understand the systemic racism in this country.
Yeah.
So I may be able to answer that question in a better way in a couple of weeks. They're still on order.
Same here, actually. Yeah. What's your favorite thing about working as a consultant?
The positive is you can chart your future. The negative, of course, is that notion of, the sky is falling every other day. Lo and behold, over the last 7 years, the sky has not fallen too far down. So I'm still able to breathe. My late father years ago said to me, nothing is a prison sentence.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Take risks and take that move across the country, because guess what? If you get there and you don't like what you see, you can turn back or make another choice. And I have filled my years of taking risks and taking chances. And believe me, doing so with terror, but always having that in the back of my mind that, I can always turn around. Using the same notion as the answer to the earlier question.
I love that.
Risks, people who step
or what
up to
inspires
fight injustices. I am huge fans of Baratunde Thurston, a woman named Lisa Witter, who has stood up for civil and human and women's rights since the day I met her. And she runs a company in Europe called Apolitical. The editorial director of the Texas Tribune, who has taught me so much, Stacey Marie Ishmael. The writer Rebecca Traister, who has written all sorts of books on feminism, on Me Too. She's a writer for New York Magazine. And then, women leaders of countries, Angela Merkel, Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand. I mean, unbelievably graceful in times of upheaval. That just truly gets me excited and motivates me. I even, as bureaucratic as the UN is, I look at all the good the UN has done around the world.
It's very inspiring. That's great. Well, you've just given us a lot of names, too, to look up. So I appreciate you sharing your inspiration with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thanks for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR, Susan.
Beth, I am thrilled to have done so, and I really, really appreciate your interest in corporate responsibility and making the world a better place.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a pleasure talking to you. And thanks to our listeners. And as always, this is your reminder to grab the companion for this episode at projectionsinc.com/podcast. And to make sure you never miss an episode of Project HR, we hope you'll subscribe to the podcast. And if you're feeling it, drop us a line, leave us a review, or simply rate us 5 stars wherever you get your content. That's it from me for now. Let's make it a great day at work.